This is Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur with your host, Lynn Freest. Lynn will share ideas and expert advice from people that are walking in your shoes and living their encore careers, where they want and at the pace they want. You'll start a company of one with confidence and knowledge to live a fulfilled life of freedom and ease. Lynn is a coach and leadership consultant whose mission is to show senior leaders and experts how to start something refreshing and new after a full career in the corporate environment.
Welcome to this episode of the podcast, Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur. And thanks again for listening. Well, this is episode 141, and it's titled Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership with Galen Bingham. Making the leap from being a corporate leader and expert into becoming a solopreneur can be daunting, but the rewards are great. You can work when you want, where you want, and you can do the work you love, just as I've done. And I can be that guide and thinking partner for you. As your coach, I'll help you go farther and faster based on what I've learned from being on this journey for several years. So if you're even having thoughts about starting an encore career, please contact me and you can take a self-assessment quiz on my website. The quiz will help you get some quick clarity around what might be possible for you in the future. And after you listen to the podcast, I encourage you to visit my website at lynnfreest.com and download the PDF that you can use as a guide as you further explore the information in this episode. So in this episode, we're going to be talking with Galen Bingham of Kiln Global Coaching and host of the podcast, Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership. Galen's a leadership trainer and a certified executive coach. He has over 30 years of operating experience with Fortune 500 companies like Kraft Foods, Imperial Sugar, and the Coca-Cola Company. Once he left corporate work and started his own business, he's coached or consulted with over 800 senior executives, CEOs, and nonprofit leaders in 7 countries. I first met Galen when we were both going through our coaching certification in emotional intelligence with the Beyond EI group. So some of the things we're going to be talking about is how the primary skill of a great leader is self-awareness. And of course, that's reinforced by what we did in our emotional intelligence training. Galen also helps leaders find the right words to express their intents. As he talks about it, sometimes it's even hard for leaders to really dive deep into finding the right words that will have the most impact on the people that they're leading. He also helps leaders uncover their big purpose. And that can be something that's actually both scary and enlightening to leaders. And finally, if you listen all the way to the end, you can hear how Galen's 8-year-old daughter gave him some of his best coaching ever. Welcome, Galen. Appreciate you being here on our podcast. And to start these things off, I'd like you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your journey and what you're up to.
Yes. So I am so excited to be here. My name is Galen Bingham. I go by the branding of being the leadership strategist. I have spent 30 years in corporate America working for some of the biggest brands on the planet, like Kraft Foods, like the Imperial Sugar Company, and like the Coca-Cola Company, and was in ever pursuit of being senior vice president of sales for a Fortune 500 company. Funny thing happened on the way to the corner office. I was given the opportunity to take an 18-month developmental assignment as an internal coach. That assignment turned into not just the region that they gave me, but it ended up being national. And then from national, it ended up being also for London, also for Canada, also for Mexico. And then it went from being in some of those countries to also serving some of the Coca-Cola Company's clients, such as White Castle, such as Red Lobster, such as you name them. And then ultimately, when it was time for me to leave corporate America, I felt very comfortable with the foundation that I felt like I had created for launching my own executive coaching business. And that's what I do now. So I'm an executive coach, a DEI consulting specialist, and I also host the Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership podcast.
So I'm intrigued by that. How about telling us a little bit about what your themes and your thinking is on that podcast?
Oh my gosh. So the podcast is my heart. So I created the podcast Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership because, I like whiskey, I like jazz, and I like leadership. So I just pulled them all together as something for us to talk about. But I also like the metaphors. So I interview leaders from all over the world in every different industry, and we talk about the metaphor of whiskey being doing what you enjoy with the people that you enjoyed with, regardless of what other people might say or think. The metaphor of jazz is how do you get from where you are to where you need to be, even when you don't have sheet music to guide you. And then leadership is nothing happens until somebody does something. I like to say nobody eats unless somebody kills something. That requires leadership to take the first step to make things happen, either for your organization or for you as an individual.
Sure. And that's, I think, a perfect metaphor for our audience here is these people are doing something they've never done before, but they want to merge together doing the work they love with something that people need. So I just love your picture there.
Yeah. I mean, it really does come down to, I can't wait to get into this for our conversation, but it really comes down to taking that first step. Everyone makes a big deal out of that first step, but if you just take that first step, then that second step is going to be just a little bit easier. And then once you take the second step, well, the third step is right there. So you might as well take it too. And if you're not careful, you might trip over the fourth step, but it's that first step that we make out to be so scary with all these fears and simulations that we have in our mind that, quite honestly, usually those simulations aren't even true. Mm-hmm. We just got to work through it and take that first step, because I trust you, things will get much easier after that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know in my experience, I came out of manufacturing background, and so we tried never to ever make a mistake. And yet when I got into, trying to do a business on my own, all of a sudden I had my younger colleagues saying, Lynn, you got to make a lot of mistakes here. You can't try to never make a mistake or never get anywhere.
I mean, that's it. I've got tons of quotes from Bruce Lee and from Miles Davis and all of these amazing people. And they would talk about the fact that there are no mistakes. They're just examples of other things that you could be doing. And the more that you can embrace mistakes, the more that you can embrace failure, the faster you will find that unique way of doing the thing that you were put here to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I've got the book from John Maxwell. It says, sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. And I try to remember that.
That's right. That's it.
I also like the whole metaphor of jazz, because, again, as people starting out trying to launch a company of one, as it were, there are some scripts, but there isn't really a solid playbook. You got to make it up on your own.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that I know for sure is that no plan will ever be executed exactly the way it was written. I mean, if you could take a look at my business plan, I'm going to tell you right now, my business plan is amazing. It's incredibly impressive, but nothing has happened according to my business plan, right? You got to be able to call an audible. If you were to think about sports, you got to be able to play off of the music that's in front of you. You've got to be able to dance with the vibe that's in the room in order to get from where you are to where you need to be, because things will never, ever go according to that plan that you've created.
And Galen, I know you also have a background, as I do, with the emotional intelligence coaching. And so some of that, I encourage people that are listening, because while you may have technical skills, probably the people skills you've built up over time are just as critical to being a success.
I would even go as far as to say that they're probably more critical. I talk with a lot of clients and I tell them that early in your career, when you're at an entry-level point, it really becomes incredibly important that you are able to provide the answer. So if someone asks you a question and you can spit off the answer pretty quickly, that's how you stand out. But as you become more seasoned and more senior in your career, everyone's got the right answer, or at least everyone has an answer. So providing the right answer is not as important as being able to work with other people, being able to ask the right questions. And that emotional intelligence becomes one of the markers for your ability to get things done. As you know, the cornerstone of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. Mm-hmm. So if you're not aware of who you are and your triggers and the things that get you excited and how you operate, if you're not aware of those things, it becomes incredibly difficult to move to some of the other elements of emotional intelligence intelligence where you're actually influencing the room or influencing an organization. So I tell everyone, you've got to become a student of you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That whole idea around self-leadership, and it requires reflection. It's hard to see yourself, but you need to do your best, take your best shot at it.
Yeah, yeah. And there are so many tools out there that will help you with that. Heck, that's what the entire executive coaching industry is built around, helping you understand the distance between your intent and your impact, because most leaders understand what they're intending to do. Very few leaders have the opportunity to clearly see the impact of what they're doing. And that's what, guys like us, that's what we're here for, to help with that.
Well, and I'd like to tell our listeners and stuff that your value is not your position or your title. Maybe that was what your value was. It was easily identified. I'm a VP of something or other. But now, if you're going out to work as a company of one, you have to be able to talk about what the value is for the customer and how you can provide that. And it's a little different conversation.
Oh my gosh, it's always about the customer. So now you're going back to my sales training and my sales days, but it's always about the customer. And when you get into sales, and if you are a company of one, you are in sales, you are in marketing, you are in finance, you are in janitorial maintenance, right? But sales is the heartbeat of any business. And in my experience, there are two types of sales. There's what I call unilateral selling. And that is, I've got one thing, it's in three colors, but it's one thing. And I've got to convince and persuade the industry to take my one thing. The alternative to that is what I call value-added selling. And that's where you have to understand what the industry wants. You have to understand what the customer wants. And then you have to figure out a way, how do you solve the customer's problem, concern, request in a way that benefits both you and the customer? And by taking that approach, you're not tied to that one thing, but you've got to really, really care about the customer, because if there is no customer, there is no business.
That's right. Yeah. And I kind of like to say is that, while I encourage people to own their expertise, you come from a corporate, you know things, you got wisdom, but on the other hand, you really have to become a good listener if you're going to be a company one, because you have to listen for what's the pain points, what's the customer looking for, because in the end, he has to solve his problem, not yours.
Oh my, yes. Do you mind if I add a little value here on this podcast? Because
Absolutely.
You brought up something that is really, really important, almost in every aspect of business, but particularly when you're trying to generate revenue, and that is listening. And one of the things that I've really become convinced of is this concept of the three levels of listening. And level one is what we usually experience. That's where I'm listening to you, but I'm really listening for my opportunity to tell my story. Right? It's like, I'm really hoping that you'll shut up soon so that I can tell you what's really important, right? So I'm listening, but I'm listening for a pause. I don't even need a break, just a pause, a hesitation. So that's level one listening. Level two listening is where you're listening to every single word in case, if you grew up in my household with my mom, if my mom said, "So what did I say?" Boy, you better be able to repeat back exactly what she said in the way she said it with the same intonation. And so that's level two listening, where I'm listening to the word so that I can repeat back exactly what was said. And that's good. That definitely kept me out of a bunch of spankings when I was a kid, when I could demonstrate level two listening. But level three listening is where you're listening to what's being said. You're listening to what's being intended. You're listening to what's not being said. And you're listening for what's the impact of what's being said. And that's a whole nother level of concentrating on the customer. But when you can do that, oh my gosh, magical things happen. You find opportunity in places that you weren't anticipating, and you find opportunity, the scope and the size of which you weren't even imagining. So if you can do that, not only will it save your business, it might save a relationship or two. It might do all kinds of magical things. So just that's what comes to my mind when I hear someone talk about the importance of listening.
Now, I read some articles and stuff by a guy named Edgar Schein, and he said, you really have to listen for the problem behind the problem. The stated problem is often just the surface. And if you keep listening, you'll peel back the onion and you'll find out, oh, the real problem is this.
Yeah. to that point, I've found in the work that I do as an executive coach that most of my clients have two elements of their problem. Number one, usually, I believe everyone knows what they're trying to do. But usually, even very well-intentioned executives, they have a hard time explaining what it is that they want to do. And they think that, well, because I can't explain it, because I can't answer that question, I must not know what I need to do. Well, that's not true at all. I mean, you and I both know that the part of the brain that controls desire is not always the same part of the brain that controls language. Mm-hmm. So I could know something and just not be able to explain it, right? If someone were to ask me, Galen, you've been married for 27 years. Why that one person? Why that one lady? Why do you love her? Well, I know why. I just can't find the words to explain it. So part of my job is to help executives articulate what they already know that they need to do. And then once we do that, if we do that right, then they have what I call a Moses moment, where they say, oh my God, so you're saying I'm supposed to do that? Oh my gosh, you mean that thing, as massive as that is, I'm supposed to be doing that? Well, yes, that's what you're supposed to be doing. And then my job then shifts to helping them find the courage to take the steps that they know that they need to take. Because everyone gets very intimidated when they realize the full magnitude of what they were put here on this planet to do. And it usually takes a lot of courage to step into that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, kind of circling around again to the jazz piece, as you know, from coaching executives, the business is changing and it's changing quickly. So even the corporate people who have a lot of plans, realize they're shifting. And so for those of us who are trying to help them from a consulting viewpoint or whatever, it's a new challenge, is because they're seeing new things too. And we're trying to help them navigate new stuff, I guess I'll say.
Yeah. I mean, the name of the game is navigation. I've got a little plaque that I keep on my desk that really speaks to what you just said. And the plaque says, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And a lot of this life is about learning how to surf the waves that are coming at you. And the tagline for my company is helping leaders bake success into their work and life. Well, baking success into your work and life doesn't mean that I found one way to do this thing and therefore that's the way I'm always going to do it. I've got the principles of what I need to look for, and I've got the confidence to step into any situation and know that I can get to the other side. And for me, that's what jazz is about. If you talk to some of the jazz greats, like a Miles Davis, who happens to be my favorite, and he will tell you, I don't want you to play what's on the sheet. I don't want you to play what's there. I want you to play what's not there. Mm-hmm. And that's really where we step into whatever this next phase of our career happens to be. How can we play what's not there? How can we take everything that we've learned and step into a space of truly adding value for whoever we determine our customer or our consumer is? Yeah,
absolutely. Another arena that I've encouraged people to consider as they talk about their company of one is in the corporate world. We have new talent coming in, and we're trying to get new talent from a wider variety of places than ever before. But often, not so much for big companies, but medium-sized companies, their leadership often doesn't have the bandwidth to really help the new and young talent develop. And so I've encouraged people to say, well, you could also consider yourself as a coach for new talent in companies. But again, the new talent is a different age than you are. They could not, maybe they don't look like you. Any number of things could be different. So any thoughts you have on how people develop themselves to help develop others?
Yeah, I think that you have really landed on something important. Research has shown that new employees determine within the first 30 days whether or not they're going to stay with the company. Now, they may not leave within 30 days, but they've already made the decision, this is not the place for me. Right? Because of something that maybe I saw in the orientation program, or maybe something that I saw in the lunchroom, or maybe, this conversation that I had with a more senior leader. I've already made up in my mind within 30 days that this is not the place for me. And I'm already, interviewing with other places. Mm-hmm. So if you can think of yourself and hire yourself out or contract yourself out as a mentor for hire, you will absolutely create value for that organization. You're going to allow them to put a stopgap on people wanting to leave the company so soon. I often talk about in between my corporate life and my current life, I tried my hand at owning a retail business. So I bought into a yogurt shop. And because I didn't know anything about running a yogurt shop, I bought into a franchise because they said franchises are easy. They're turnkey, right? You just pay some money and you get all this other money out on the other side. That's what the brochure said. And what I learned pretty quickly is that the biggest metric, the biggest trigger, the biggest lever to your success is your ability to keep people. And on a much, much smaller scale, I knew that training a new employee would cost me $250 per employee. So I would put $250 into them before I could sell one cup of yogurt on the other end to recoup that back. So if you only stay with me for a month, I haven't gotten any return on that $250. Now, $250, some may hear that and say, yeah, that's a lot of money, but that's not a lot of money. Well, the difference between running my frozen yogurt shop and running the Coca-Cola Company, you take that same $250 and put a comma and a couple zeros in front of it, you got the exact same problem. Just the numbers are bigger. So I think you're onto something that if you can position yourself as a mentor for contract or something helping those companies stave off turnover, oh my gosh, if they understand anything about their business, they would jump all over that.
Yeah, and I think in general, I believe new employees are interested, always have been, but certainly today are interested in the development. So if you can kind of start off right away, being more intentional about developing them as opposed to here's a desk and here's a big pile of paperwork and stuff like that.
Yeah. Oh my, yes.
Yeah.
Another word that you use that I think is a lot more significant than people may realize if they're just casually listening is development. Development is different than training, right? We all have seen training programs and, they've got training programs online. Heck, I've created training programs online, but that training really isn't focused on development because development is about making sure that there's understanding. And that can only be done if there's a conversation. And so your ability to have a conversation with someone to make sure that they understand the training program, they understand how to think on their own. That's the difference. And that's what I think many of the companies are missing right now who just have the online HR generated training programs.
Yeah, when I was with my former company, one of the probably the most effective programs we had for new leaders was sort of a peer group, but we gave them a bunch of context. Here's the information about leadership. But then we had them for 6 months and they actually coached each other, these leaders, on here you coach and then we'll circle back and I would provide some mentorship as to how they're doing, but so that they could speak about leadership and not just have heard about it, I guess is what was really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, that's a significant difference. I mean, even think about the emotional intelligence training that you and I went through. That's largely how it was constructed, right? I mean, anyone could read a book on emotional intelligence. Anyone can read a book written by Daniel Goleman. Anyone can watch some videos on the importance of emotional intelligence. But a big part of the way that program was constructed, we learned the content, but then we had to pressure test that with each other. And then we had to coach each other and we had to try it out and we had to talk about how to make that better and what was the impact of that. That's real development. I've been through a number of training programs. I've been through very few development programs. And the one that we went through, Beyond EI, led by Michelle Navarez and a bunch of other really, really smart folks, that is a true development experience.
Oh, yeah. Because it's not just development, but it's also relationships. We still know all these people. We enjoy getting together with them. And so it's, I think that ongoing connection really is really helpful for us in that program. But the same would be true, if you could develop that kind of a program and deliver it to a client, make a big difference in their business.
Yeah, I mean, there is a responsibility that you feel for others when you are in community with them. Mm-hmm. When you're not in community, it's easy to think of it as something that will just benefit me. How can I get what I need from it, right? And there are all kinds of programs that you can take where you can walk away with a certification, right? That's what I need. But when you're in community with someone, you feel a responsibility to not only get what you need, but make sure that others are getting what they need. Because I think at our core, we all want to be in community. Mm-hmm. Nothing else this pandemic has taught us that we really enjoy being social beings. And the more that we can do that, the more that we can create that as the leader of an organization, I think the happier your employees will be. And a happy employee is very often a more productive employee.
Yeah, thinking back upon our program with emotional intelligence, that while we did have the on-site things that were wonderful to get to know people and really develop relationships, I was always impressed by how close the relationship stayed even when we were remote, and even today. And again, along with that, it was, the people from all over the world were involved, and another piece that I saw from that was that, okay, the issues around leadership, emotional intelligence, maybe different countries, but the issues are kind of similar. So I was just impressed with that.
I think people are the same all over the world, and we may speak different languages. We may have different customs. You name the difference. We can always find differences, but I think at the core, everyone is trying to make a difference. Everyone is trying to feel like their existence matters. And the degree to which you can recognize that in others and feed that for others, I think the more effective you can be, and quite honestly, the happier you'll be, because we're all trying to figure this thing out on a rock that's spinning in space, right? We're all trying to figure this thing out. And if we can just be a part of helping each other figure it out, I think we're going to land in a better place.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and then the other thing, again, people my age or whatever, that sometimes we're concerned about technology and issues like that. And what I've said is, yes, we got to somehow stay abreast or understand technology, but some of what we bring is around things like leadership, the people issues. And again, I've often told people, I read a book every day called The Daily Stoic, and they're describing little problems around relationship and people issues, and they haven't changed much in 2,000 years. So some of that, what we probably have is we bring some experience in that. We've seen a lot of the people issues, whether we've handled them well or not. We know the difference now.
Yeah. I think you bring up another great point, that people get nervous about technology. And I really tried to break it down into the what and the how. And the what never changes. What we do to solve problems has not changed. You've got to take a big problem, break it down into smaller problems, and then start chipping away at it. That's how you solve every problem. That's been the case since the caveman days. But the how has changed, right? Back in the early caveman days, all we had were our hands. And then we found rocks, and we figured out that the rocks were a little bit easier with breaking things down. So we started using the rock. And then we figured that if we took a piece of metal and we kind of chiseled the rock, then we can make the rock have a point or have a curve to it. So that was technology. Well, today's technology is the same thing. We can use an app to do all kinds of things, but we're still trying to do the exact same thing. How do we break a problem down into smaller pieces that we can tackle with other people? And I don't think that's ever going to go out of fashion. I don't think technology will ever replace that. And since technology can never replace that, there will always be value for people who can solve problems and work with other people.
Absolutely. I was involved in several technology programs, and it always boiled down to, it was never the issue, wasn't technology. It was always, how to help encourage people to adopt it or explain it to them, or it was the people was the issue, not the actual technology.
Right. Exactly.
So other thoughts you had, we kind of covered some of the pieces with your whiskey, jazz, and leadership. Other thoughts from that work that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, so the podcast is just a great opportunity to not only just hear from me, but I interview leaders from literally all over the world, from all walks of life. I've got the CEO of the Honey Baked Ham Company. I've got the global president of Hanes Innerwear, the former CEO of Anheuser-Busch. We've got actresses, we've got authors, we've got musicians. Just, we even talked to my high school basketball teammate, right? So we're talking to everybody. But the biggest thing that we're doing is we're helping leaders, we're helping listeners figure out, number one, what whiskeys to drink, right? Really, really important. Very few important things get solved without drinking whiskey. So we help people understand what whiskeys to drink. Number two, what music to listen to. But again, just the metaphor of how do you get from where you are to where you really want to be, even when things aren't laid out in sheet music that you can read. And then how do you take that first step? That leadership piece is about taking that first step, because as I said before, that first step is always scarier than it always seems scarier than it actually is. Mm-hmm. And so if we can get past our fears and take that first step, I promise you that second step is easier. And if you take that second step, well, the third step's going to be right there. And after you take that third step, you better be careful because you might trip over that fourth step. But it's getting past that fear that we put into that first step. That's the hurdle. That's my wish for everyone. Just if you're thinking about doing something as an encore to this career that you've had for 20, 30, sometimes 40 years, just take the first step. And it doesn't have to be a big step. It doesn't have to be, acquiring another company for $100 million, right? It might be doing a Google search on who are the other companies in this industry doing what you're thinking about doing. Go take a look at their website. Yeah, that could be a first step. A first step could be doing a Google search on the name of your company to see if someone else has it, right? You can do that in 15 minutes or less. Mm-hmm. A first step could be talking to a friend and saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing, launching this business. Is that something that you would need? Would someone like you need this thing that I'm thinking about getting into? That could be a first step. It doesn't have to be a big first step. Mm-hmm. Just take the first step. I promise you that first step will not be as scary as you've made it out to be in your mind.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And, as you said earlier, life is a series of steps. So once you've taken the first one, then they start falling into place, and pretty soon you're quite a ways down the road. And
yeah. Another thing that I will offer to your listeners, because I just had this conversation with a client last week who was actually thinking about transitioning out of a career that she had for 25 years. And she thought she was at a place where she wanted to travel, she wanted to retire, she wanted to do something else, but she was reluctant because she enjoyed her job so. And by the time we got through our coaching session, she realized that by stepping into this next phase, it wasn't abandoning her past. It was actually taking her past into this new evolution. What is the next evolution of the things that you've done? What does that evolution look like? Mm-hmm. How could you do this thing that you're passionate about at a higher level with more people without some of the constraints that you might be under right now? And so for her, when she started thinking of it as an evolution, it really changed some of the anxiety that she had around taking that first step, because who wouldn't want to step into a new horizon of evolution as opposed to trying to leave something behind? So it really is about breaking down that first step.
Yeah. And that's recently, in the last couple of months, I've been working through a class put on by what they call the Modern Elder Academy. And it's all been about the transition and how do you reinvent yourself. You're not necessarily just quitting your job. You're actually going to maybe pursue it in a different fashion. And like you said, that can be, you can actually have a bigger impact than you have in your current job in many cases.
Oh, my, yes. One quick story. Back when I was still in corporate America, actually before I took the developmental role that they asked me to take, I was on the path again, to becoming senior vice president of sales. And the way that you did that when I was coming in is you go from entry level to, account manager, from account manager to group manager, from group manager to director, director to VP. And it's just that progression. And I was at kind of a crossroad where they wanted me to move out of a people leadership role and move into kind of an internal consulting role. And I was kind of torn because I thought I had some ability in this space that they were asking me to go into, but I didn't see how that would be a direct link into my becoming senior vice president of sales. And I actually talked to my daughter, who happened to be 8 years old at the time. And she said, well, Daddy, what do you do in your current job? And I said, well, I talk to people, I help them get better at what they're trying to do, and we go out and we deliver results for the company. And she said, well, okay, well, what would you do in this other job? Oh, well, I talk to people, I try to figure out how to help them get better so they can go out and deliver results for the company. And she said, okay, well, Daddy, how many people do you help now? Oh, well, sweetheart, I've got, 18 people that are on my team. I help 18 people. And she said, well, how many people would you help in this other role? Oh, man, gosh, over the course of a year, probably 1,000, 1,800, maybe 2,000 people. And she said in her 8-year-old voice, well, Daddy, I still don't really understand what it is that you do, but if you're really about helping people, sounds like you'd be helping more people in this thing that you're concerned about and nervous about going into. And so from the mouth of an 8-year-old came the wisdom that I'm hearing you talk about here right now. And so, Lynn, it's important that people become a master of understanding themselves, what's really, really important to them, and see this as an opportunity to do that thing at a higher level, maybe without the same constraints that they might have had in their previous role.
Sure. Well, absolutely. With that, I thank you very much, Galen. This has been a wonderful conversation. I appreciate your input. And then we'll have links to your podcast in the show notes so people can kind of connect with you there again and hear more about whiskey, jazz, and leadership.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and thank you so much for what you're doing. This is an incredible podcast. I know the hard work that goes into really adding value to your listeners, and you're doing that in a top shelf way.
Well, thank you. And I may have to add to mine because I guess I'm more beer than whiskey, so maybe mine will have to be beer and an encore career or something. But
that works.
Okay, well, thank you. Again, my deepest thanks to Galen for sharing his insights and knowledge on what it takes to be a great leader. As a quick recap, some of the things we talked about were how the primary skill of great leadership is self-awareness, how Galen helps leaders find the right words to express their intents, how Galen helps leaders uncover their big purpose, and how this can be both scary and enlightening. And finally, if you've listened this far, you heard how Galen's 8-year-old daughter gave him some of the best coaching he ever got. So remember, with an encore career, the rewards are great. You can work when you want, where you want, and do the work you love. And again, as your coach, I'll help you go farther and faster based on what I've learned from being on this journey for several years. As a seasoned and experienced person, you have the time, attention, and money to make this leap. So let me help you do that. If you're having some thoughts about starting an encore career, please contact me and also take the self-assessment quiz. That quiz can help you find some clarity around what might be possible for you. Well, with that, we'll see you next episode, and thanks for listening.